let's take this time to discuss a very serious topic: UFOs. Today we have Brett Weinstein. No, sorry, that's his brother. We have Eric Weinstein on Chris Williamson. He sits down to discuss this nebulous topic of UFOs, something he claims he knows nothing about. So we'll definitely see what they dive into there. If you're not familiar with Eric Weinstein, he's a mathematician. He's, I believe, the managing director of Teal Capital, or at least was. And I think he's also been ostracized by the academic community, but is still somehow an academic and is publishing papers of the sort. He has his own theories in physics, and that of the liking you can go check out. But more importantly, we need to find where these aliens are.
Somehow channel the technology of interdimensional space beings.
Please never say those words.
Hey, look,
That's what we're calling them now.
Interdimensional space beings. David Grush didn't say extraterrestrial, he said interdimensional.
Yes, but Eric and David talk, and this is not fair to David Grush. David Grush knows that he's a physics BA. He knows he's not a PhD. He's repeating things that have been said to him. He had the presence of mind to try to give an example of what interdimensional might mean, and he used holography. And so as a result, everyone's making, David Grush says holographic interdimensional beings. This is absurd, and it's not fair to David Grush. I'm telling you, I mean, we can call David up.
Okay, very quickly, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear holographic interdimensional space beings, something of the liking? It sounds like some good woo, some good academic talk, some good theories of relativity and beyond. But it's pretty interesting that Eric is just calling it out right away, even though there's no way for us to really tell exactly what the nature of the universe is. But it's a good place to start, to be skeptical at least.
Now, and I promise you, he's not going to back this madness and stupidity.
So what's going on with this most recent update about aliens?
Which one?
Well, I saw this
Many.
frustration that lawmakers had because they were getting compartmentalized. If you don't ask precisely the right person, precisely the right question in precisely the right way, you're not allowed to get an answer. You don't get an answer.
But you couldn't even... Look, if you don't know what a Riemannian manifold is, if you don't know what a determinant line bundle is, there's no way you can ask intelligent questions about alien visitation. How did they get here?
See, this is what gets so tricky when you're dealing with academics, particularly in a sphere of almost no evidence, you could say, at least in the public realm. You throw out these terms, you look at like the finance bros, they throw out terms like a beta and the RSI or the S&P 500, and you start saying, what is going on? I must need to trust a financier with all of my funds because they definitely know so much more than I do. And there is credit to that. We've built civilization based on expertise and specialties and so forth, but when you're talking about a topic so abstract like aliens, yes, you need a model and a framework to base your theories off of. No, I don't think you could just go out there and spam whatever you'd like and claim that to be the truth of the universe. That's especially so objective outside of our literal world. But I don't like the shutting down of conversations just because they don't know these particular terms, right? And again, I want to give credence to the physicists out there, to the scientists, but this is where a little bit of the hubris just starts to poke its head, just because now people like, let's say myself or yourself, might feel ostracized and say, look, I don't have a horse in this race. How can I have these conversations? But I do urge you to think about these questions, at least questions themselves, because that will lead to new conversations and thought processes and possibly theories about what might literally be out there. So, again, a little point of contention here, but I do see what he's saying.
There are no scientists. There are no relevant scientists in this story.
Okay.
Does anybody find that at all odd? Even the situation with David Grush is fantastic. He goes into a hearing. He says a bunch of completely batshit crazy stuff, right? Can we agree on that? All right. And then weeks later, some representatives go into a skiff and they say, well, it certainly seems like it confirms some of what Grush has been telling us. And you're thinking, okay, so you've separated the confirmation, which you did abstractly because it was inside of a skiff, but you can only talk to people who've emerged from the skiff who are willing to say vague things, and the crazy claims.
Yeah,
now,
I see.
What is this really all about? Nobody knows.
So the question really is, how do we dissociate and how do we separate these arguments from, you could say, the crazy arguments that really have no foundation to them, and those that have come from in this abstract realm of some evidence or the thought of evidence? And even then you start to dissect, well, what's in the public sphere and what's in the private sphere, and how much credence do those things have? So again, this is why it's so tricky, and I definitely see why Eric has such a tough time with this this conversation, being that he's even in so many of these, you could say, possibly private circles or at least academic circles, and it makes you question, okay, if there is something out there and someone has some insight on it, why are they hiding it so intensely? And I think that can get more political. But other than the political realm, I think it's so much more to ask, what does it do to the human psyche to understand that there is a civilization out there, and to have possible misconceptions of them? What would that do to how you view life in its entirety?
Now, what I've been saying for about 4 years is there's way more to this story than I had understood. I thought UFOs were total nonsense. I thought this was a waste of time.
Were you one of those?
And
I always loved them.
I was just wrong.
Why?
What do you mean?
In what ways were you wrong? Why are you now convinced in a way that you weren't previously?
Well, I didn't know. Yeah, I'm not convinced that UFOs, like shiny metal craft, are real at all. What I didn't know is that there almost certainly are large programs inside the federal government that are denied, that are labeled UFO, shh, don't tell anyone. Now, whether those programs contain anything about non-human intelligence or aliens or spacecraft or anything like that is anyone's guess, because I haven't seen anything. However,
how do we know that that's not a proxy for other types of programs that we can't even fathom?
The programs almost certainly exist.
What gives you that impression?
Talking to 4 million people who tell stunningly similar stories.
So there we go. He would know more.
In other words, there is a weirdness. And the weirdness is tremendous circumstantial evidence that these programs have existed for a long time, and have involved extraordinary, in particular, physicists way back in the day. And on the other hand, that there's no credible proof that there are craft or aliens or anything like that.
How do you square that circle? How would you?
I can't. Look,
the coordination problem of all of these people is immense.
Yeah, so essentially what he's saying is that because of these, let's say, government agencies or programs, there are so many people, even although relatively small, still involved in a project like this. If we do accept that they do exist, that the coordination problem is you have to assume that there are so many people that are come together and not talk, and that word isn't going to dissipate outwards, and that people aren't going to start leaking information, which you could make the argument that more leaks have happened in recent years than not. But you don't exactly know where those leaks come from, right? It's hard to give them it's hard to verify them, right? But I think the more interesting conversation to have here is, if these programs do exist, how much information would you expect and accept from them to then move forward with a legitimate argument for alien civilizations or extraterrestrial beings or just UFOs in and of themselves? And I think there's a huge conflation with conspiracy theories and then government leaks and not knowing exactly how to verify what's coming from where, because it's such an abstract topic. But just the fact that there is funding into this, I think, does beg the question, as many people say, just follow the money, right? But that in and of itself is very difficult to do. So then you start relying on people like Bob Lazar, if you haven't heard his testimony, saying that he worked, I think it was at S4. This is decades ago now, saying that he worked on a potential alien spacecraft. Whether it was alien or not is not to his knowledge, he claims. But these conversations keep percolating, and it does, I think, spark the interest of people just enough to be like, wait, if this is real, this does actually have an impact on my life, because I think that we all inherently have this conception, we all have this notion that we want to believe that there is an objective reality, that there is other beings in this universe that exist outside of our world and anything that we've constructed. And I actually think, interestingly, that permeates our psyche, that permeates our actions and our behaviors in a way that allows us to act as if there really is some objective order in the world, or that life in other places can actually inform our morality, because then there is a uniformity to the way that life proceeds, succeeds, and grows. But that's more on the behavioral front. But this is just simply talking about UFOs in and of themselves. It's so true. Where do you start?
there's that, but secrets have been kept much more effectively than people imagine.
Say more.
Okay.
I don't want to.
There we go. See? That could be proof of it.
No, but I mean that. There are organizations that you cannot Google. There are organizations that have clubhouses and members that you cannot Google.
It's not even that you can't Google, just that you're not even aware of.
So I know that secrets are durable. What we don't know is what these secrets are about. See, let's create a decision tree, which is there are little green men, shiny spacecrafts, and all this kind of cool stuff, and there aren't. Okay? If there aren't, what's the best explanation for why there's so much energy and activity and so many claims around this? And I would guess, and again, this is a guess and not a particularly good one, that there was a clearinghouse program for everything under the sun. If we needed to retrieve somebody else's plane behind enemy lines, we had a UFO cover story.
There
If
we go.
were trying out new aerospace equipment, we had a UFO cover story. If we were trying to get our rivals to misspend their precious treasure on weaponry and strategic countermeasures, we had a UFO cover story. If we were up to no good, we had a UFO cover story. Whatever all these things are, imagine there was a kitchen sink approach, and that's what UFOs are all about. It's about a black SAP, special access program, as waved and bigoted as it could possibly be, that basically was a one-size-fits-all story for all sorts of things.
It's an extraterrestrial scapegoat.
Yeah, an extraterrestrial scapegoat program. Okay. Now,
Interdimensional,
that is,
holographic.
if you imagine that leg of the decision tree is real, it's all very funny, because now you're like, all these people have taken it seriously, but it was the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians who were supposed to take it seriously. Like, ixnay on the UFO fay, it's like people are going to blow this beautiful cover story that we've created for everything. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is that we're on the other leg of the decision tree and that we have no programming for it, and so everything about it seems impossible. What's what you said about physics? Physics is science fiction. The physics that you just learned is almost always about science fiction. What if you have multiple time dimensions and people can circle around in time, and if you find out about them, they can circle back to the point where you didn't know it? You have a neuralizer built into the successor to space-time. Is that real? I don't know.
Who knows?
All I know is that physics will always blow your mind. It will always do something that seems impossible, and that's why it's the coolest subject around. Now, I don't know what's going on, but I can tell you that the circumstantial evidence that there's been a program that has been long-running and involved very high-level people, it's almost impossible to imagine that this is fake. There's a 1971 Australian document from the Australian Intelligence Service that has been declassified and made public, which clears up all sorts of mysteries about what was going on with physics in the 1950s and 60s. And it names names. It says that Freeman Dyson, John Archibald Wheeler, Pascal Jordan the Nazi, all of these people were working on anti-gravity. And the only reason to be working on anti-gravity is that there was reason to think that something had gone beyond Einsteinian relativity.
Okay, couple things here. So what he was saying initially regarding having these programs, and then Chris echoing that these can be used as scapegoats, is essentially that you have, let's say, a story that you want to obscure, and then you cover up that story with the UFO phenomenon, or say that it's being taken care of under these programs through these classified documents, so there's really nowhere to go. And again, you run into this problem as to where to start, and very little people will actually put in the effort to see exactly the nuances and figure out the intricacies of these programs, if they even can. So it's a very easy way to push, I guess, other programs aside or other initiatives aside. Let's just leave that there. But what I think is incredibly interesting about this is why a UFO story then to obscure other stories, to obscure other programs. And I think that there's something very fascinating to us about UFOs. It's an obsession, it's an addiction we have that we can't let go of, regardless of how many times it slaps us back in the face. It's like giving that friend that treats you like crap more and more chances despite what they do. And this is kind of the UFO argument. There's something very interesting, almost inherent within us, that makes us feel compelled to instead direct our attention towards a UFO story. There's something about it, and I think it lies in this concept of objectivity, in this universal order in the world that exists outside of us. And interesting, you can make a lot of arguments for God. I know it sounds bizarre. How could God come from this? We're talking about alien civilizations and UFOs, but just bear with me for a quick second. If you can extract that there is an objective reality, there are principles and values that exist outside of the individual, and let's say on top of that there is now evidence for an alien civilization, I'm not saying that God is this omniscient, omnipotent being that's created all of this, but it does beg the question, what exists outside of me? And if there is an order, there must be a source of information. Again, you could just call that God. And take religion out of God for a second and just use God as like the highest value in a value system. If all these values start to trickle down and construct what we know of as the universe, as consciousness, as living beings, there must be some inherent, you don't even call it a hierarchy, but there is a structure to the universe. And you can call that physics. And that's what I'm saying. You can, in tandem, interestingly, call physics in parallel with God. I know a lot of people won't like that, but it just kind of organizes our thought process that there is some sort of structure to the universe. And if we aim towards this God, let's say, this sense of order, I think we'll be better informed as to how to act. And now you're starting to trickle into some religious arguments that trickle down morality without there having to be a human element to it, right? It's just an understanding that there are principles that exist outside of you. But now, moving on even from that, I think what he said is so potent, that what Eric is talking about here, that physics will continue to blow your mind, whether you're talking about classical physics to quantum physics to string theory to whatever the case might be, and what we continue to evolve into. There are so many contradictory, or at least seemingly contradictory statements when you look at the theoretical physical realm. And what I wanted to ask you is, do you think that those are inherently contradictory? For example, when you look at what's known as the grandfather paradox, where if you can go back in time, kill your grandfather, would you then even be born to be able to go back in time? These are these logical loops and these paradoxes that tend to puzzle us, and we try to think of the physics within them based on how we understand a concept like time. But again, what I want to ask, is that inherently contradictory, or is it our ration that's inhibiting us from understanding the lineage of thought that actually untangles the contradiction there? Maybe it's something within our ration. It's something within our inability to think in a circular way. It's something within our inability to use language outside of this linear structure that's actually inhibiting us to think of time as a malleable construct, let's say. Now, I'm no physicist, but I do think it's important, again, back to the initial conversation, for us to ask these questions about maybe those of what we see that seem like stark polarities are actually working in conjunction with each other in this huge tangled web of intelligence, right? And maybe it's our ration that can only lead us so far into that direction that everything starts to fall apart, as you might have heard famously in physics. You know, you might start to realize that so much of your worldview will fall apart, especially even like a classical physics view, when you start getting into the quantum realm, for example, right? Where electrons are in superposition, and where an observer can actually change the state of matter. So these get very tricky, very cool conversations to have, but I do think they need real questions behind them for us to really dissect them properly with the tools that we are equipped with, such as rations, such as language. And even if they can't completely explain this abstract, I think that they are a pathway, they're a portal for us to ask these questions regarding these arguments within physics. And I don't think you have to be a physicist to at least ask the question or start that conversation. So that's what I challenge you to do. And my goodness, what a fun ride that would be.
In other words, mostly we learn about physics from colliding Yeah, it's like breaking rocks together. You're going to smash two rocks, and then maybe you'll see a little spark, and you'll study that. Except we do it with protons. This would be like some different thing where there was a more advanced species, and you're looking at its machinery to try to figure out, well, what science does it know that you don't?
How much truth do you think is in that? I've seen rumors on the internet of leaps forward in technology throughout the mid-1900s that people suggested was due to reverse engineering of something that had been discovered. Do you think that the technology movements that we made through the 1900s were self-created?
I'm not clever enough to solve the UFO puzzle.
The humility,
There's
love it.
almost no topic where I can't generate multiple explanations. This is the only topic I've ever met where I can't generate a single explanation for what the hell's going on. Nothing I can think up makes sense.
Okay, but this is now clouded in obscurity as well. What exactly is he talking about? This seems very dramatic, like, oh, none of this makes sense. What are we talking about? What exactly is not making sense? Is it the fact that we don't know how to validate if there are aliens? That could be one pathway. The next one, how would we respond and act if there were aliens? That could be another. And the third is, what are these programs that might be hiding information under the sheets about real alien programs or UFO programs and evidence maybe, right? So again, this dramatic obscurity is really starting to make things even more convoluted and more difficult to wrap our heads around when it doesn't necessarily have to be. Again, just pose the simple question. What is the pathway? What is it that you're trying to solve for? Even if you can't find the answer in the moment, it doesn't mean that the question shouldn't be asked, right? It could promote a certain line of thought that then sparks imaginations and curiosities within other people. Now, I think if we look at some of the questions that we can start to dive into, never mind the three that I had just mentioned prior, I think we could start to dissect even more and say, okay, if there is an alien civilization, what does that mean for human civilization? Should we live in congruence with an alien civilization because they're all we have as a reference point for intelligent life in the universe? Well, they might be asking the same question back into us, and then we would think, okay, who's more advanced? Because possibly the more advanced civilization has more intelligence and has more information to equip them with evolution and how to do things quote unquote the right way. Again, these are all just simple questions that we can keep asking ourselves to get into a cycle of understanding how would we respond in certain situations and what does that tell us about the human condition, which is I think really at the crux of what we're all trying to figure out here. But a lot of this surface layer stuff about these government programs, where the funding is going, is just kind of a pathway for us to start looking at these topics. I think it's much deeper. I think it's much more philosophical, if you may, and something, again, that I urge all of us to keep talking about.
I don't think it's practical to traverse the cosmos using general relativity in the Standard Model. You can use time dilation, you can hope for wormholes, you can imagine generation ships. There's a whole bunch of stupid stuff that people talk about when they talk about interdimensional travel and all this kind of nonsense. Why? Because they can see the night sky and they can't get there. So you think, okay, in terms of the science that I've seen Carl Sagan discussing or on Cosmos with Neil deGrasse Tyson, how would I get to a distant planet using the science I know? And then you have to sort of do it with masking tape and, chicken wire or whatever. Whatever that is, doesn't really appeal to me. They're not here if they're here using standard physics. Now, I've tried to make a list of everyone on Earth who has a distinct theory of physics. Right? So you have, Julian Barbour has a theory, or Stephen Wolfram has a theory, or Peter Woit has a theory. So I go through all of these other theories, and to the best of my knowledge, nobody else does that. Like, we've stopped talking to each other. We've stopped thinking about this. So in the world of theories about how something might be here, there are very few theories of the universe. And why is that? It's because the constraints are so profound. There's no room to move, to imagine, to let human creativity take over. We're in a straitjacket that is so tight nobody can think. And we're there because our theories are so good.
This is exactly where my mind was going, is I want to ask, well, why is that the case? Because it doesn't seem like people aren't interested, because as soon as a topic regarding UFOs or alien comes up, everyone's ears perk up and they're ready to listen and they want to know something. So I don't think it's a lack of interest. It seems to either be, well, you'd think maybe a lack of funding, which is the straitjacket itself, or just the inability in academic communities to really pursue any of these theories, because the grounds that they have to stand on right now through classical physics and theories of relativity may not grant them a launch pad to get them to that next level. Like Eric just said, we probably can't traverse space in the way that we already understand space-time. So it requires possibly a new theory, and maybe no one's willing to make that leap or put their career on the line for something that might have no grounds in it whatsoever and might lead to absolutely nothing. That would be a travesty for someone who's worked at science and physics their whole life, right? But I think that it's an honorable leap of faith and something that should be pursued more. So what do you think? Do you think that academics should be given more free range to pursue their interests, and therefore then share that back with the community? Because if we even take this back into, if you're familiar with Rick Rubin, a producer, I know this seems way off topic, but he talks about creating for yourself, and that is what you can do best for the audience. Do not create for the audience, create for yourself. So if we follow that same philosophy in the scientific, academic, and physics world, do you think that we'd actually produce more work, better theories, because we'd give these academics and professors and so forth free range to really act on what they believe to be true and what they think is actually going to be most beneficial, where their passion lays. Now, the real question then, from an economic perspective, is who funds it, how do we fund it, and how do we decide which passions we fund and which ones we don't, right? So I know there's so many more nuances there that are involved in that process. But again, just from an abstract third-person point of view, I think as a human community, we do need to look at how we view these topics, how we pursue these topics, and maybe even the most practical thing we could do right now is simply to have more conversations about this in the public sphere. When you go to a coffee shop, ask someone what they think about the UFO phenomena, but not in a weird way. You got to be very logical. You got to read the room. Maybe if the conversation leans in that direction. But again, I think the more we talk about it, while having the humility to separate any crazy theories or making any obnoxious claims, just again asking the questions and having these conversations will actually generate some sort of aggregate score as to what humanity really values when they pursue or understand or contrast themselves with regards to another civilization, right? And that might seem a very futile effort, like something that's really not worthwhile pursuing. I understand, you're focused on your friends and family and putting food on the table, and that is, you could argue, so much more important than contemplating whether or not UFOs exist. But I do want to ask the question, if you understand that there is an objectivity to the world that exists outside of our perceptual illusions or our human experience, how would that inform the way you actually think about life and death and God and all of these abstract concepts that we just kind of push to the side, but might actually give us so much more confidence in how we pursue our own lives and how we make decisions and how we care for each other, because we understand that there's a sanctity to life. There's an order there that really does exist, and I believe is pure. I definitely hope that to be the case. But again, so many ways that these conversations can go in so many different directions, from the political to the academic to the abstract. Which one's your favorite? What have you thought about this topic, and what are some questions that you have regarding UFOs? Are they here? Do they exist? Where do they come from? What would you do if you had your hands on a UFO? I mean, flying around in it seems like the best bet, but we could save that for another day. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you had fun toggling with some of these conversations. Again, it's for fun, for philosophical conversation. Please like and subscribe if this made you think or question, even in the slightest, and we'll definitely be seeing you on the next one. Thank you so much.